Well, good morning. Welcome to this edition of Wealth Psychology at Sylvia Global Media. I'm your host, Emily Bouchard, and I am coming to you from Northern California. My partner and co-host, Jamie Traeger-Muni, is recovering from 8 months of treatment for breast cancer, and we're looking forward to having her come back after her hiatus. She's doing great in Israel. And today we are really excited. We have an amazing guest. So glad he's here from another international country, from Canada. We have Dr. Tom Deans, author of the all-time best-selling family business book, Every Family's Business, and also a newer book called Willing Wisdom. We're here to talk about that book in particular on wills and why we don't have them and why we need them. And just a little bit about Tom. He does speaking engagements and international lectures all over 500 conventions and seminars. He speaks about the whole concept of family and money, and he says that family has emerged as the greatest economic driver of all time, but the question remains, how can wealth be transferred successfully without destroying the recipient and the wealth itself, which is, of course, why we're having this conversation. Here at Wealth Psychology at Sylvia Global Media, we are all about shifting our relationship to money and wealth so that people can live and lead truly rich lives, no matter how much money is in their bank accounts, and where their families can stay unified and connected, and that those arguments around money don't tear people apart. So we are going to have a great conversation with Dr. Deans. He's a distinguished career in banking. He was a CEO of a multinational corporation for a decade, president of a railway, and chairman of his local hospital foundation. He's been featured in numerous magazines and on other shows a little bit all over. So, Tom, welcome to the show. We're going to be talking about your book, Willing Wisdom. Can you tell us why you wrote this book? We're going to start off with that. What was your passion about writing Willing Wisdom, and why did you do this?
Well, first of all, Emily, what a pleasure to be here. And just to let your viewers know, I'm in southern Canada. So it's not quite snowing, but it will be in about 8 weeks. So the sun is shining. Great to see you. And I got to tell you, I was so excited about doing this show because I know a little bit about you and about your organization, and I know that our messages are really, really in sync. So let's get started. I really wrote this book, like any author who writes a book, to convince myself of an idea, not my readers. And I always like to make that point very clear up front. I think when people are absolutely certain of something, they write tedious books, they write boring books or pretentious books. And I know you've read the book, and I know you can probably attest to it. It's not pretentious. It's accessible. Yeah. And I'm trying to convince myself of a simple edict, and that is that families who can talk about money, who can collaborate on their wills, will enrich and deepen their relationships. And so, you know, I'm 51 years old. I have a will, but my will is constantly evolving. So I'm trying to work through in my own space how it is that I'm going to transition the wealth that has been entrusted to me by my grandparents and my great-grandparents. So it's very much
I think a lot of successful people, that is one of the big questions that they have, that they live in, and they really don't know how. And I love how accessible your book is. It makes it so it's a very conversational exploration around what has people stay up at night, or what has people really wondering and pondering, you know, especially when they've shifted to more money management and next career after they've really been successful in building their career.
Yeah, I think you're right, Emily, and in as much as the book is Socratic, right? It has 7 questions. So alarmingly, it has no answers, but it has seven great questions that everyone can ask themselves and their family to start conversations, to probe and explore what is right for them. And I can tell you what's right for you and what's right for the viewers will be completely different than what's right for me. And I think that has where estate planning in many respects has gone off the rails. We've tried to develop products that kind of fit everyone, and it really lets families down. And I think it lets down financial institutions. So I'm coming at it very different, not preachy, not making assumptions, starting with some questions to get the family to gather around that proverbial campfire. I'm going to use that expression because I really mean that. Too often we think that family meetings have to take place in stuffy boardrooms. That was my experience growing up, and I don't think it has to be. I think families can get at this subject of wealth and aging and convalescing and ultimately dying in scenarios that are bless you, that are bless you. You've got one more.
Hopefully not. I think I'm all right. Thanks.
But I think we can do it. We can have these conversations around the campfire. It doesn't have to be formal. And the best conversations are the ones that are truly partnerships in family. So it's not the person with the money who's old and dying, who's got the power and the control and dictates that this is the way it's going to be. I'm looking for something more democratic, something that's more accessible for the entire family to feel as partners. And it's that partnership that I think is going to lead, hopefully, most people to a great will, a great last chapter of their lives, because they're going to experience it with their family and their friends.
Well, that's a great place to do a little station identification. We're here at Wealth Psychology at Sylvia Global Media. We're talking with Dr. Tom Deans, author of this great book, Willing Wisdom. And we are going to launch into our next segment on what does it mean to be reciprocal in terms of how you have a conversation about wills, because that really struck me in your book. Yeah.
Well, let me answer that question by kind of picking up where I just left off, because it really does fit. I was giving in my first book when it was launched. I was giving a speech. It was in Las Vegas actually, and the message of that book is: don't gift your business to your children. If they want it, they need to buy it. So it's this important idea of risking capital to transition to business.
Oh, and, you are. I can imagine that stirs up a lot of feathers when you're having those conversations, because there's a lot of estate planning strategies on how to transfer the wealth and gift over time, and there's a lot of advisors who make a lot of money by doing a different thing than what you've just said. So this is good. I'm excited you're exploring a different way people could go with it. So yeah.
Absolutely, and there are lots of people who think that the goal of succession planning is to make the business last at any cost. And so I come along and I say, absolutely not. In fact, the real goal is to find the end of the business before the end finds you. In other words, businesses have life cycles. Oh. And so what I'm saying is sell the business. If your children don't want to buy the business, then you need to sell it to someone else and then pass the wealth. Now, it's
much smarter to do that when you're still involved in it, and you can really look at the valuation. I think a lot of people so strongly identify with the businesses that they've created that the concept of selling it is it's almost like dealing with their own mortality, which I think is one of the things you're saying in this book as well, is people really need to have a good sense of how to deal with their death, their will, their end of life, as they really strategize about how they're going to live their lives.
Well, you're absolutely right, Emily, because what they do is they import the language of the family and refer to their business as their baby.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So what I come along and say is, in fact, no, your family, your baby, your children who are now grown adults are your family, and your business is over here. It's this thing that it's an instrument of wealth creation. Don't confuse the two. And what I'm saying is, your legacy is not your business. Businesses come and go. And quite frankly, in 100 years or 50 years, people aren't going to remember you as the founder of XYZ company. Okay, they're going to remember you as the father of someone who passed on a wisdom and wealth that created opportunities for the next generation. Your legacy is not a business and a building with a name on it. It's your family. It's your DNA. And getting business owners to shift their thinking to the family is really the subject of the second book. And so when I was in Las Vegas,
yeah.
Well, when I was in Vegas, a woman came up at the end. I was signing books, and she came up and she said, "I just disagree profoundly with what you've said." In fact, she was a little bit annoyed and angry. Animated would be a subtle way of putting it. And I said, well, first of all, I was completely honored, because anyone who has the confidence to come up and disagree with a speaker means the speaker's earned their fee. They've challenged the audience. They haven't peddled the same old thing. They've really gotten into someone's consciousness. So she's there, and she's saying, look, you're saying I need to sell my business and pass my wealth. My business is worth $10 million. I've got 2 children. Are you suggesting that $5 million to each of my children is what I should do? I mean, that's too much money.
Oh,
That'll
my
destroy
gosh.
my children.
She interpreted that to mean that. That's really good that she asked that question because that would cause a lot of mischief if people really misinterpreted your message to say that.
Well, exactly. I mean, so I'm saying, what she was basically saying is her children didn't want to buy the business. So it was leading her in her own mind to sell the business and then pass the wealth to the children, which she felt uncomfortable doing. So I was really put on the spot, and I said, I got to write this book. I've got to write another book to answer this looming problem. We have the greatest generation of wealth creators in the history of civilization as business owners in America who have created more wealth than anyone else ever. And they're struggling with their succession plans. Why? Because they're actually feeling more comfortable in thrusting the business into the hands of children as opposed to leaving them vast amounts of cash. In other words, the business feels like it's the right thing to transition because at least the kids are going to have to work at that. Whereas wealth, man, boy, they can just, they'll have nothing to do. They can just become spendthrifts and off they go. It will destroy my family. So it's a real problem. So that's why I wrote this second book, Willing Wisdom, to offer families a new set of questions so that they can start to figure out how much and to whom they should leave their money and when. And if they can answer that, then they can deal with business. They can transition the business after they have written their will. No will, no business succession plan. I guarantee it. I've met tens of thousands of business owners who don't have wills. They don't have wills. I asked my audience, I did a convention in Chicago, 1,000 people in the audience. I asked the people who had a will to put up their hand, half the audience. Half the audience of business owners had no will. So in other words, what we have is we know that we're going to see close to $8 trillion transition be inherited over the next 20 years. And half of those people, half of the wealth holders have no will. $4 trillion in the next 20 years will transfer via the public trustee deciding, the government, the state, deciding who will get someone's wealth. It is bizarre. I can't imagine how it is that we've found ourselves as a culture, as a society, with 125 million American adults without a will.
Well, I think that's interesting because you actually are imagining it. When I read the book, you actually dive pretty curiously, really looking at, okay, what is it that causes somebody to not have a will? What is it that has somebody know that this is a good thing to have and yet not do it? And it really is about one of the pieces that struck me when I was reading the book that had me say, oh, do we need to have a conversation and bring it forward is this idea of how do you express what you want, what you care about, what your concerns are, and do it face-to-face with your loved ones, listen to what their concerns are, what they care about, and do it in a reciprocal fashion. And, really bringing that conversation alive. And there's no way you can do it if you haven't come to peace and to a place of, I feel okay about my mortality right now. If I died tomorrow, I really feel like I'm ready. And nobody seems to be living that way. Yeah. And nobody's really having those conversations in any kind of effective way. And that's what this book really tees up for people.
Well, I think that's certainly what I set out to do, is to get people excited about their will. Now that seems a little bizarre, but I don't know about you, Emily, but when I buy someone in my family a gift for their birthday, and I give it some thought, and I nail it, it's something they need, it's something they want, I know it's something they'll like, and if I buy this gift a couple of weeks before their birthday, it kills me not to give it to them right away. Like, I'm so excited, right? I'm so excited. It's like, someone opening that present, you're just standing around, you just want to see that look on their face. Well, I'm trying to get people to imagine that their entire life's body of work, all of their assets, their homes, their investments, all of those things represent as a metaphor of a present. How can we muster that same excitement to leave those gifts, not just to one person, but to our community and other family members? How can we generate that same excitement about giving and leaving something to someone that needs something, that can take our wealth and continue our life's work? That can only happen through a conversation. And it can only happen in a collaborative way, viewing a will as a collective work of art, not something that we write in secret with our lawyer and then die holding it a secret, and then having our family learn in a cold, austere lawyer's office about what the contents of the will says. I'm saying make it a living, breathing, collective work of art today.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it can't change, but that we can learn and reciprocate. I think people who write wills in isolation miss the forest for the trees. I think when we engage our potential beneficiaries and ask them what they would do with the money, we have the potential to learn right up until the moment we die. And that's what makes death and I think palatable, because it's a collaborative journey.
Well, I think a lot of people might agree with you in theory, but then the objections that are going to come up, I'm just thinking about the people that are watching this right now, is, what, you tell your kids, like, before they're even in high school, like, how much money they're going to expect to get, and how are you going to possibly have them want to be industrious and making a living for themselves, as opposed to just becoming waiters, where they're just going to be waiting around for this money and that they didn't have anything to do with. And I love the story you have in here about when you were 18 and how you definitely wanted to do some consumption in that moment, and you had some learning with your father in terms of how he spoke with you about industry and work that made a big difference for you. Would you speak about that?
Absolutely. So in our family, there was just an enormous amount of transparency around not just who's going to get what, but just actually how much there is. But we're also very cognizant of how long we live in our family. We have enormous longevity. We live into our 80s and 90s. So when you're 18, it's a long way from 18 to 90. So by creating transparency in the family around money, it's a full transparency. So we know not just the amount, but how and when, and the purpose of money. It's taught and it's learned over time. These people, who might be watching, who have some assets and are feeling nervous about sharing with their beneficiaries what they're going to get, I do a little technique. I ask them, if you were to die tomorrow and that wealth that is already captured in your will transitions, say, to a child.
Yeah.
If you have a will, or even if you don't, the government has a formula, and that chances are the money will transfer to your child. Maybe not exactly in the proportion you want, but imagine you die tomorrow, and the concern or the anxiety you're feeling around that child having that wealth don't disappear. In other words, the only way it can be dealt with is if you talk about it and share and express concerns or hopes and dreams for what that person will do with that money. In other words, I'm trying to create the urgency for people not just to write a will, but to share it. And if you're feeling concerned about your giving decisions, then deal with it and make different giving decisions, or ones that are appropriate for the beneficiaries. Whether that's your family, your friends, or your charities, they all need to have the conversation. You need to know, and you're entitled to know, how these people will deploy your wealth. And not just your wealth, but the wisdom behind the wealth. And that's really what the kind of double meaning, the double entendre, if you will, of the title, Willing Wisdom. It's not about writing an awesome will. It's about leaving more than just money. Your wisdom. That's the valuable piece.
Now, you just talked about it from one side. But I want to go back to the reciprocal nature, because you also propose what it would be like to not just listen to, oh, how are you going to use this money, or this is my values and this is what you're going to get and how are you going to use it, but also what are your wills, what are your intentions, what is it that you want to be expressing in the world, like that reciprocal nature. And how young do you start that with a child?
Well, it started very early on, and I'm really glad you raised this, because one of the themes that I've really detected just through the course of traveling and speaking all around the world is this temptation for grandparents to leapfrog over their children and to pass wealth to grandchildren.
Well,
in other words, there's lots of...
It's also something that they're strongly advised to do by advisors at different times. Again, it's, so much of wealth planning, estate planning is driven by tax avoidance and governance and, just how to structure the structures of it. And I think that I want to make sure that we bring that forward. Is a grandparent may be quite well-meaning and well-intentioned, not just I'm skipping over my kids because, whatever their issue might be with their kids, but because their advisor said, oh, this is a great strategy to use, so just take care of that a little bit.
You are absolutely correct. It is the tax tail wagging the dog. So we have beautifully designed estate plans that reduce tax, and everything looks fantastic. It's great advice. purely from a tax point of view. What it doesn't pay homage to is the corrosive and damaging effects on family relationships.
Yeah.
And in a way, it leaves families completely impoverished, rich but impoverished.
Yeah.
And so what often happens is grandparents look at their own children and they say, well, my goodness, there's a house and they have cars and they take vacations, they have good jobs, and so we have surplus wealth. This is the grandparents speaking. So we're going to give it to people who need it. So we're going to just leapfrog over our children, and give it to our grandchildren. Of course, you and I both know that if families aren't talking and sharing their financial positions, there's lots of families who look like they're wealthy, but there is a lot of debt. There is just an extraordinary amount of debt being held in the hands of children. So what happens is the wealth skips a generation, and we create trusts often that actually release money to children, and the children are actually more wealthy. They have a higher net worth than their parents. Yeah. And then, of course, that just sets up a dynamic. It is so unbelievably destructive when parents are dependent financially on their own children, particularly for late in life care. So as time marches on and children have more money than their parents, it sets up a dynamic that culturally we're really not prepared for.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm working with a really lovely young woman. She's early 30s, and her father passed away when she was quite young, and her paternal grandmother died, I don't know, I guess about 3 or 4 years ago, and the grandmother's estate transferred to her grandchildren because, and I think in this case it was because her father wasn't alive, and she is suddenly in the position of being the main resource for her mother. And we're working with the dynamics, not just in terms of her coming to terms with this inheritance she's received and the emotions around it, with the loss of her father and the connection to the father through the money, but also taking on that role and responsibility with her mother and all that goes along with that. And then who is she and how does she want to express her values, what matters to her, and how to embody her identity in the face of somebody else's agenda that she received, and what is she supposed to do with it based on what she thinks her father's wishes were. But again, she didn't necessarily have these conversations with him when she was a little girl, and she certainly didn't have them with her grandmother, and she's now in this position with her mom trying to figure it out.
Yeah, you said a powerful word. You said, I think. It's really, when people don't have these conversations and they die, these conversations are irretrievable. Yeah. And I'm always amused, mildly amused, at funerals when you hear people, immediately say, I wish I had asked. I wish we had had the conversation. Like the clarity around the questions that are now, and conversations that are irretrievable. The clarity is remarkable. And I'm always both confused and amused by that. And I wonder why it is that we need to wait for death to bring that clarity, and how it is that we can create the emergency, the inertia today to get people to get those questions on the table, to share those family conversations about money and its transition and what money can accomplish. Money is just energy. It's just surplus energy. And when we pass our energy on to our beneficiaries, whether they're children, friends, or organizations, it really behooves us to inform them how that wealth was created. I mean, it was created through hard work and ingenuity and creativity. That's the wisdom. And just to leave money in a kind of a vacuum, in a dark room with no space around it, with all the questions, it can really rob beneficiaries of their own uniqueness and their own identity, and it's tragic. I mean, we see and we read stories every day in the news about inheritors going off the rails, and you can see how wealth destroys potential as opposed to creating opportunities and releasing creative potential. That's really what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, definitely. The Town and Country just had their August issue had a whole inheritance guide in it, where they really looked at a number of different inheritors and what they've done, both positives and really not so impressive, and just the whole gamut that people can run. And they had a whole section on what you do when you have a sudden windfall. And Jamie had a chance to weigh in about the very first things you should do and how you really want to take the time to kind of at least a year before you make any major decisions around it. And if you don't have these conversations and all of a sudden you have this money come to you through an inheritance or, even if it's a liquidity event and you're just going for the end result, but you're not really talking about what does this mean and look like, it can really throw people in their lives and not necessarily for the better. So I want to do a station identification, and then we're going to jump into this whole conversation around how to have these conversations. So we are tuning in to Wealth Psychology at Sylvia Global Media. My name is Emily Bouchard from Wealth Legacy Group, and we're here talking with Dr. Tom Deans, author of Willing Wisdom, and we are talking about wills and why we don't have them and what we can do about it. So our next segment is with Dr. Tom Deans. We're going to be talking about how do you have these conversations. And Tom, could you start us off by talking about your memories, maybe your earliest memory in your childhood of when your family started to talk about wills in a way where you had an understanding of it, and then how it progressed? Because I'd love for you to paint a picture in the viewers' minds of how they might actually be able to do this.
My very first recollection of a family meeting was in Montreal. I was 5 years old. It was 1967, and we went to this old gentleman's club. It was called the MAAA, and it was this oak-paneled room, and we all had on our suits and ties, and there was a group of advisors around, and it was really quite extraordinary just how much transparency there was. There was no kind of excusing us from the room when they got to the numbers. We just kind of grew up in this world where it was all shared. In other words, a kind of a hard-earned understanding that secrets seldom serve families, and so wealth maturity concepts around wealth ingenuity they're learned. They're learned like any other skill.
Yeah.
And I think the inclination, I think, of most people is to hoard the wisdom, or they don't know how to start those conversations. Yeah. And of course the stakes get incredibly high, and they defer those conversations. So they say, well, I can't tell my child that they're going to inherit $5 million because they're only 16. But they don't answer the next question, which is, well, when is the appropriate time? Is it 18? Is it 25? Is it 36? I have met some business owners who won't share their financial information with their children, and the children are in their 50s and 60s.
Oh, yeah. So, I know, and they might even be working in the business. I know.
Well, exactly. And there's a word to describe that. It's a psychological word. It's called infantilizing. It's where grown adults treat their adult children as infants. And they never let their children grow up, and they never start those conversations about wealth and how wealth was created and what wealth can accomplish.
So I mean, we could talk all day about the conversation piece. What was the mood when your parents would talk about this? How do you remember, like, when you went to the meeting? Was it like you couldn't wait to get out and it felt really oppressive, or were they smiling and in a good mood? Like, what were your impressions of that conversation?
Well, I'll tell you, I know for certain that some of those meetings were very upbeat, and I know some of them, had concerns. There was always my sense, and I have to share with you, my father and I come from 4 generations of business founders. So we start businesses, we run them, and some of them have been publicly traded. But I have to share with you, Emily, my mother is a psychotherapist. So I grew up in a world of hard numbers and in a world of relational discussions. And I think, to answer your question, I think I've always been exposed to, even in those meetings, I was kind of toggling back and forth between what some people would call the hard and the soft issues. Of course, we know the soft are the hard issues, and the hard ones are typically easier. But that's just what I grew up in. So what I did grow up understanding was that every single business, just like every single family, and certainly every family business, has a beginning, a middle, and end. So much of those meetings, the content was around where that business is in its life cycle. So we've sold 4 businesses. We've never transitioned a business into the hands of the next generation. We've involved them in the employment of those businesses. That's where we kind of cut our teeth. But we never gift our businesses. We gift wealth. We gift a lot of wealth to our children, and we give our children access to our personal and professional networks. We groom them, we ready them for the day in which they'll have access to capital, and they're prepared, and they go off and they start their business. And the chances are that it's going to be very different than the previous business and the one before that and the one before that.
You bring up a good point. I just want to tap in here for a minute, because at Wealth Legacy Group, we're really strong proponents of defining wealth much more broadly than just the dollars in your bank account or, how much assets you have. And it has so much more to do with, are you transferring your wisdom, your intellectual capital? Are you transferring your social capital? Are you transferring your networks and how to design and create really powerful networks? Because that's where true net worth lies. If you lost everything tomorrow, again, who are the 10 people you're going to pick up the phone and talk to? And what kind of relationships do you have around that? And where the financial capital is one facet of it, but it's not the defining facet of it.
And Emily, I think that's excellent, because I think it acknowledges that every family and every individual and every family is different. There are certainly, I know as do I, that I've met inheritors who have inherited $1 million and they've turned it into 50 million. Like, there are some, we want to believe this narrative that everyone who inherits money is going to somehow go off and buy cars and clothes and just consume it. I have to tell you, I am awfully impressed with the generation of what I would consider better educated, more socially attuned generation who will take their inheritance and deploy it in a very different way that pays homage to the way in which the money was created. I continue to be impressed. But what does the media focus on? It focuses on the inheritor who seeks fame and addiction, and it falls apart. That's what we learn, and that becomes the dominant narrative. And I have to say it's quite unfair, particularly for those who have a social conscience and who actually are really committed to perpetuating the family name, not necessarily the family business, but the family name in a responsible way.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about these meetings that your parents were conscious enough, intentional enough to start when you were quite young, and I'm assuming with all of your siblings, is that there's this sense of your mother had the psychological background, the know-it-all in terms of how to create a safe container, to make it so that whatever the concerns are that the kids might have, the questions that the kids might have, are open, are welcomed, are encouraged. And I think a lot of times the people that we work with, they bring us in when a lot of challenges have happened in the family because it hasn't been a safe place to bring forward your questions or your concerns. And especially when those secrets are in place, then there's a sense of, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to know or what I'm not supposed to know, but how am I supposed to look at my future and my estate planning and what I need, what matters most to me, if I can't ask these questions and there's something looming back there that's going to impact my life at some point, but I don't necessarily know when or how much or to what degree I'm going to have say or control over it. So there's a lot at play in not having these conversations. And I think that when people bring us and they look to us for support, it's because they don't have somebody like your mom who knew how to create that space. And maybe even some damage has been done because people, when they've tried to have this conversation, it hasn't gone very well, or there's been repercussions afterwards.
Well, I think you're really bang on, and I think what you identify is that when families can talk and treat families as a kind of as a partnership, that takes some great introspection to relinquish control, because when you're aging and you have the assets, you effectively have control. You're in the position of saying you'll get this and you'll get this and this is when you'll get it and here's how much. It is an imbalanced relationship, and it is the rare individual who kind of relinquishes that authority and control and has the wisdom to do that and to create families of partners that will, as time marches on, we know that the children will play a lead role in the provision of late in life care. We're dying much later, and the way that we're dying is profoundly different. We're not suffering massive heart attacks. We get stents now in our hearts, and we live for another 20 years. But we convalesce for 20 years, and we rely on family for 20 years in ways that we never have before. What kind of families? Ones with deep, open, trusting relationships around the most divisive subject, money, or the family that talk openly and honestly and transition wealth in a way that is respectful and releases potential. That's the guy who's going to get great care. The one that built that kind of family. That's the family that's built to last, not the ones that treats money as a source of control and wraps it in secrets.
Yeah, Yeah, that's leading a truly rich life. Like that's the wealth that's around you when you really need it. And it's about the people that are around you. And what have you done in terms of your power and control to further those relationships or to keep
Mm.
them more at a distance and to have less trust and communication. So really important information. And I think our next segment needs to be about this whole concept of consumption for consumption's sake and also the way in which we identify with what we have that makes it harder for us to be able to speak about how we want it transitioned and what that means to us. I think that you make some really important evocative points in your book about that. So this is Wealth Psychology at Sylvia Global Media. I'm Emily Bouchard, your host today, and I'm here with Dr. Tom Deans, author of Willing Wisdom. And we are talking about what is it that keeps people from having wills, how to go about having a will. And in this segment, I want to talk about what is this about consumption? You brought it up a couple different times. Your family obviously transferred some really important values, and I want you to talk about what values you saw transferred and how your parents did this in terms of working for money and doing really good things with the money that you're given. Obviously, there was a sense of, oh, wealth is going to be transferred, and I know when. And you have a very grounded intentional way of moving in terms of consumption. So I'd like you to speak about that.
Well, Emily, let's go back to where we started in those family meetings where I'm learning, as with my brother, about the magnitude of our family's wealth. And, we learn, very early on, there's people who are, fantastically wealthy, certainly more wealthy than our family, and lots that are less wealthy. There is a kind of a context about what has been created in the family. But what's also really being taught is that we have this wealth, and yet my father and grandfather are working. And so at a young age we're thinking, well, why are you working? I mean, you don't need to. And so at an early age that seed is planted about the nature of work. It is not just to create wealth for consumption. There is something intrinsically purposeful and satisfying about working. I've met lots of billionaires on the speaker circuit. They're working. They don't have to. There is something about the creative genius that leads us to get up in the morning and add something, to build something, to invent something. And that's what people who master wealth get from an early age from their parents. That is the gift. It's not the money. It's the idea behind the money and the nature and the essence of work. And so that's what family meetings do. And I have to be very clear, some of the best family meetings subsequent to those early ones that I attended have taken place on the back deck, on the dock at the cottage, around a campfire, where families speak with equanimity around, as partners, about what it is and how things will transition, and what can be accomplished with wealth beyond buying another house, another car, another plane. In a really interesting way, what we've learned in our family is that when we can kind of die without hanging on to things. In other words, the more we've relinquished prior to our death, it almost appears that we have an easier, kinder, gentler death. In other words, to master life is almost an essential requirement to master death. And those who have awful, torturous, wretched deaths are gripping onto their stuff, thinking that the things that gave them satisfaction in the temporal world are the things that are going to give them peace of mind as they're dying. And it's not so. It's simply not. And so talk to anyone in palliative care, anyone who's providing late in life care. It's those people who come to terms with how they're going to transition, not just their stuff, but their ideas. And they have magnificent last chapters of their lives. It's inspiring.
Yeah. And I like how you speak about knowing that you have the capacity to make a purchase and have it be something, but choosing not to live from a place of excess, or if there is something that's more luxurious that you want to have, really demonstrating what it's like to plan for it, save for it, do the research, maybe involve the kids in it, look at the time frame around it, so that the kids are seeing that, yeah, we have the capacity to buy anything we want whenever we want, and there's also something to be said for being smart about the purchases you make and being deliberate and not being impulsive. And I think that that's something else that was a value that got transferred from your parents, it seems.
No question. I think there's also something in us, and it's hard to describe, but I certainly feel it. This sense of obligation for leaving an amount of money that is larger than was left for me. It's a little bit of a game. It's a little bit of a kind of a competition. Like, I'll show you, Dad, that I can create more wealth than for my children. And backwards, going backwards through the generation, I feel like this has been alive in our family. That it's this kind of understanding that when we receive a gift, we have children, and that wealth is going to be divided. So if you do the simple math and you look at a founder, maybe a little depictive here, but if you have a founder and he has two children and they have two children and they have two children, if all we're gifting is money, the money will be consumed. In other words, someone has to take that gifted money and risk something of themselves to create new wealth, or else the growth in progeny will outstrip the growth in the money that's been gifted. It won't last.
What I like about what you said is because you come from a family of business starters, developers, founders, is the cutting the teeth in the businesses where the people in the family, part of the transition of that wealth was transitioning the wisdom and the knowledge of what makes for a successful business. How do you make sound decisions? How do you make grounded risks as opposed to more foolish risks in terms of, hey, this seems like a nice scheme, or that person seems like they're trustworthy. You know, it's like, no, there are really good principles that you can use and apply that we've applied as a family over generations that have made a big difference in terms of how we are successful, how you can be successful and grow it. And I like how you said competition, but I think what I find is really energizing for the people that we work with is this sense of, wow, I've been given this remarkable gift in terms of what somebody else has used their industry to create. And how do I bring my gifts to it? How do I bring my talents and my abilities to then honor that gift, not just steward it and keep it safely protected and tight and use it a little piecemeal, but how do I take calculated risks with that transfer of the knowledge of how to do this? And if I haven't gotten that, perhaps that money's been generational. How do I go about surrounding myself with key mentors and great role models and take the courses that were going to show me on how to be effective? And, you know, one of the things we get a lot is people who don't have these conversations, it's like they're born into it, and their parents may have a language in terms of what it means to have come into it, but they haven't transferred that to their kids. And then the kids are supposed to already know how to speak that language. Jamie often talks about it, like if your parents came from France and they speak French fluently, but when they raised you in the States or in Canada, they only spoke, and Canada, that would be really good analogy, they only spoke English, and they never taught you how to speak French, you're going to be at such a disadvantage when suddenly you are given a tremendous amount of resources that require you to speak French. And that's the finances, money, wealth, business, that's a language. It's a language that can be learned, and understanding how to have that is hugely important. And I often start off with an inheritor that I'm working with in terms of using personal finance for dummies. Not because they're dummies, but because let's start with the basics and make sure you have a really good grounded understanding that anybody can start from, and they don't have to feel ashamed about what they do know or don't know. And it sounds like you've had that from the time you were 5. Like, this is what you need to be aware of, this is what you need to understand.
You're absolutely correct. And I have Estate Planning for Dummies on my desk. I could reach for it. I absolutely agree. I love that book. I mean, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's a whole kind of guild, a subworld with its own language, estate planning. And I think it intimidates, and I think it's a real barrier. So the great advisors are able to kind of invite people into the process and make them feel like that they have something to learn and something to contribute. I mean, they can teach us so much. I want to pick up on a point that you made, and I really believe that the most important, interesting parts of biographies of the great political and commercial leaders and industrialists in the history of civilization. I always like those early chapters where you're reading about family, like the family conditions and the parents that gave rise to this kid called Lincoln, who came up with this audacious idea that went on to become so impressive. Like, How did that happen? That's the chapter that I want to read, that he has gone on and done this and accomplished so much. The musicians, the artists, the Salvador Dali's, what gave rise to these geniuses? Because it's from our family that we receive our greatest gifts. And in most of those cases, it certainly wasn't money. It was something far more profound and valuable.
Yeah. Well, in our next segment, we're going to be talking more about that. So, welcome to Wealth Psychology at Sylvia Global Media. I'm Emily Bouchard, your host today. I'm here with Dr. Tom Deans, author of Willing Wisdom, and we're talking about how to go about having your will and not putting it off, and some key ways that you can really start this process and bring forward a way to transfer your values and your valuables to your next generation. So can we talk a little bit more about what you were just speaking into, Tom, in terms of families, how they transfer their wealth? If I were sitting here with your kids right now, they're what, 8 and 10? They're young. How old are your kids?
They're a little bit older. They're 18 and 19. So
oh my gosh! Well, you just seem so young. I just Okay, so if I was sitting here with your 18 and 19-year-old, and we were having a conversation, and I was like, gosh, I'm so sorry about the loss of your father. What is it that he transferred to you? What is it you remember about your father? And do you think that he would have any regrets or anything that he wishes anything you wish that you had a chance to ask him about?
Well, I think they watched me sell my father's business in 2007, so they watched me have my liquidity event, and so I think they've also watched me, post-sale go on to work exceedingly hard, writing 2 books and traveling extensively. I mean, I've never worked harder, but I'm working for very different things, and I think they found that curious. But I think they've also seen me kind of tap into a real passion. I ran a very large plastics manufacturing company. That was the family business, and now I'm a professional speaker. I give 100 events and all around the world. This is what I should be doing. I was good at making plastic. This I am really good at. So I kind of found my nirvana, and I think the gift that I've kind of given them, I think they would say, is the lust to find their nirvana, to find that thing that gives them extraordinary passion, and then become the very, very best at it. And I cannot tell you what they'll decide right now. But what I'm almost certain of is that they're not going to join my publishing company and sell my book and give my speech. It would be a kind of a ludicrous example of a family business. They will do what they're good at, and what they're good at is the thing that they're passionate about.
Wow, that's great. And what values do you think that you've transferred in terms of, like we were talking about the consumption, and you've written about it in your book. Have they read your book? Like, would they say, yeah, my dad walks his talk, or what would they say?
Oh well, absolutely. I mean, we're Canadians, but somehow there has to be a Swiss gene in there, because my son is a Swiss banker. He still has his first dollar from his first birthday gift from his grandparents 18 years ago. He is phenomenally parsimonious. Okay, he's cheap. It is unbelievable. I'll tell you, I got to borrow money from him. He is so cautious. He is so careful. So the challenge, actually, it's interesting, because the challenge there has been to help him take risk, to see the value of taking risks and not to be cautious. He's cautious by nature. He's an introvert. He's incredibly cerebral. So that's the challenge there. On the other side, my daughter has no problem with shopping. So we're working on taking less risk. It's very interesting. Same kids, same house, same genes, and yet we have two very different kids with relationships to money. So two challenges.
Did they have meetings with you guys from the time they were 5 about your wills and what you're up to?
Yeah, very early on, and in fact, the 7 questions that I've shared in the book that I'm offering as questions for families to ask themselves to start their conversations about wills are actually abbreviations. We actually use more, but seven's a good number. It's a good way to slide into it. But yeah, we have annual family meetings. We go through what's happened in the last year in terms of our financial position, who's got what, net assets up, down, sideways, and they've been both over the course of years. So they've seen not just the good, but the transitions and the difficulties and the down years. 2008, how could you not have gone down with the public markets? They saw that. I think they understand. They've had a front row seat about the nature of money and risk in ways that many kids don't.
Yeah, that's great. And do you think that how would they describe those meetings? Like, would they say, yeah, Dad talks the whole time and we listen and go, huh? Or is it a real dialogue? And are they answering those questions as well? Or are they just hearing from their parents about it?
Well, there's two parts to that. So the questions that we ask our kids are the same questions that we ask of ourselves, and we're quite deliberate about that. And we're also quite deliberate. I use the expression in the book. We were given two ears and one mouth, and we try to use them in that proportion. We try to listen far more than we talk at the family meetings. So it really is a forum for everyone to talk equally about the future, about what the money can do and should do. And it's very interesting how those conversations have evolved, how this proportion of money that we leave to charity versus what we leave to our children is a moving target. I find that absolutely fascinating. And there's a tension, a natural tension between those two ultimate channels, right? Family versus charity. And in families where there is wealth and those conversations are never had, of course we know the government, when they apply their formula, doesn't make allowance for planned giving. They don't make allowance for the charitable section to receive maybe what someone intended. And that's a real lost opportunity.
Yeah.
I think the greatest gift is when you can create philanthropic endeavors with the collaboration of the people who will be stepping in and stewarding that money and driving the future of that money in those organizations. So, my grandfather left a large gift to my alma mater, his alma mater, and I sit on a committee. We hire a speaker, a world thinker, to come in and deliver a lecture every year. So it's one of the most enjoyable parts of my year to actually sit on that committee, select a speaker, fly to my old college, and listen and watch what my grandfather's gift will do in perpetuity. It's an amazing thing. And I was there when that gift was created. I have the whole story. I was part of that whole story. Not my money, but my gift, because I get to participate in it.
I want to make a point about this because a lot of people think, oh, you can only do that if you've got millions and millions. And I'm thinking about when my mother died really suddenly of a cerebral hemorrhage bursting when she was 44. And it was a big shock, and certainly didn't have any of these conversations. And that's not going to happen in my generation now. But one of the things that we definitely had was her values were transferred. We knew without a doubt that she was passionate about nursing because she was a nurse, and children, and education, because those were really strong values that she had held and embodied in the course of our lives. And we said, in lieu of any kind of flowers or anything that people might want to do, and people wanted some way to acknowledge their grief and loss, is we created a fund in her name at the Children's Hospital, where my father was. He was head of a department at the Children's Hospital in Houston, and so we created this fund, and it was for nurses, kids, and some sort of gift that would be given to some sort of. There was an application process to do with their education, and we loosely defined education to mean anything that they wanted to study and learn more about. And so, let's see, that was in 1980, and my father every year sends us a report of the who came to the scholarship meeting, how many scholarships have been given, what lives have been touched by it. And we've had children that were given gifts in the 80s coming back with their kids and sharing about what the ripple effect has been for them, because they were given money to buy a computer when they went to school, or they were able to get that violin for their violin lessons, and how music is now a big part of their lives. And we really see how my mom's legacy is going to live way beyond my dad being there. He'll retire, and that fund and that gift giving will keep going, and it's a way to keep that alive in our family. And somebody from our family will keep being invited to go to that. And I think that that's a really good point to make, that it's not about only if you have this money to say, I want it to go to an organization, but people can really design ways of having their legacy live on based on their values and what they care about.
Yeah, see, now I'm certain that other viewers will pick up on what I just picked up when you were telling that story. You got really animated. You got really, really authentic. Like you were moved by that gift.
Mm-hmm.
It shaped who you are.
Oh, yeah.
And you've just told that story. I don't know how many viewers you have today, but you've shaped something. Your mother's gift shaped you, and you shaped someone else, and it's rippling forward, and it'll never stop. And this is the great gift. It's not our stuff. It's how we leave this world, not what we leave necessarily. It's how we do it and how we change lives moving forward in the most interesting and peculiar ways. And it starts with a conversation and with a dream.
Wow, thank you. I think that I'd love to end with one of the questions that you find is the best way for somebody to start off this conversation, and people can get willing wisdom if they want to learn the other 6 questions. But I think that this is such a valuable thing you're offering to people, and would love to hear which question you'd invite people to open up the conversation with.
Well, I think my 7, I would say I do have a favorite, and I would say how would an inheritance advance the dreams of your family and your community? Because I just think that one it's personal. And I think the person who's doing the willing, doing the giving, will learn so much when they hear, often for the first time, how someone can use a modest amount of money today. Okay, we're not necessarily talking about transferring wealth when someone dies. There are ways of transferring while you're alive, so you get to enjoy it. When you get to release the potential, the creative potential of your emissaries, your family today, to learn that they're interested in helping as as the gift that your mother, has made. Those are powerful things. I mean, this is an awesome family that can unlock those stories. I still give to a charity personally that I learned of from my grandparents. It was called Sleeping Children, and they provide bed kits to Africa. Now, I haven't been to Africa, and my only reason for giving is kind of the stories that I heard and how I could see my grandfather get animated, telling stories the way that you got animated right there, the way exactly you just got excited, remembering your mother, is what excites me today to continue that gift. So that one question about asking your beneficiaries, how do you think my money can release your dreams? What an awesome gift to yourself. Never mind your beneficiary. What an awesome gift to yourself to learn right up to the moment that you die.
You know, one of the things you're describing, it's so amazing when I hear it, because it's like every person's dream to be able to ask that and to be able to answer it. And the other side of it that I see so often is my dream and what it is I would do is so vulnerable and so sacred, and it's like the last thing a lot of people would ever put in front of somebody who has a lot of power and control and say, if they have a sense of it being judged or put down or not being honored. And I think that one of the coaching pieces that we do a lot with parents is how to create that safe space so that when they do invite their children to risk saying what really matters to them, that there's a listening there. There's a space of, oh, that's important to you.
Yeah. Emily, Henry Ford's father was a farmer. Steve Jobs' biological father was a restaurateur. Something led those kids to go off and do something profoundly different than their own parents and create things that are just magnificent. I mean, this is the goal of parenting, is not to create children that replicate who you are and what you think, but to create the opportunity to for them to live and become the people they're meant to be. And we cannot presume what that is.
Well, I like what you're saying. I'm just thinking about, wow, we need another show about how to coach people and how to do this. I'm thinking about a really successful entrepreneur I was working with in a family meeting. He and his wife, very successful, 4 kids, young 20s, early, like later teens. Great kids, really industrious. They all had different personalities. Dad was a fabulous hunter. He loved to go do big game hunting. And, we talked about, well, his values had a lot to do with the way you give back is you create really thriving businesses that create jobs for people. And so then we opened it up, and it was a space of, and what if your daughter's way of giving back is to go to Africa and document, not with a gun, the big game, but her camera, and to start an NGO over there to really further the importance of being wise about how we're treating animals when it's in direct opposition to your values. And it's not about creating jobs, but it's about looking at the environment and our impact. And facilitating that kind of conversation was not something, because there was no way she was going to bring forward a value like that with his very strong certainty about what it's supposed to look like.
I love it. I love it. That's important work. And I think the role of, we've touched on it, but we haven't gone into it, is the role of an advisor. There is nothing more tricky than the intersection of money and family relationships. And to have a third party in the room like yourself to manage these emotions, particularly in the early days when this culture of talking about money isn't natural, it's not the natural inclination. It's awfully important, I think, for families to have the wisdom to bring someone in, just to get things started. Some families may thrive and take off; others need more care and ongoing care. But I'll tell you, when it really starts to happen for a family, it's amazing.
Oh, it's magic, and they get exactly what it is that they want, and it's like learning the skills. It's not hard to learn the skills. They're simple, but it's not necessarily easy to practice again and again because we have habits. But noticing it and naming it the moment that they show up and saying, "Oh, wait, that was an automatic response. Let me try again," can make a huge difference. And I'm thinking about, oh my gosh, one father and daughter. We were trying to encourage the daughter to come forward with something that really mattered to her, and then she confided that she didn't feel safe because when he had asked before about, oh, what is it that you would want of ours that really matters to you? And she said, well, gosh, that nativity scene, I have so many wonderful memories of that. I'd love to have that. And he just immediately, his automatic way of being said, what are you talking about? You're not religious. And it was like, wait, there was other values she was expressing. And she was like, oh, can't speak about what I want, so that kind of slowing it down and remembering that if somebody's coming forward and something that they care about, the first move would be really wise to be one of curiosity, discovery. Oh, I never would have imagined that. Tell me more about what that means to you and why you would want that. That's surprising to me. Is much more useful than, what are you talking about? You can't, that doesn't make any, that judgment piece really keeps kids at whatever age, this was an adult, being able to, it's like that sense of, am I being opened up and invited to step in so then, I'm going to end up getting slammed again? That's, I think, the key, that you open up such a vital, valuable conversation for families with this book, and I can't recommend it highly enough. These questions, Dr. Tom Deans, in terms of what he's offering families as an option and possibility. And we're going to have more conversations, Tom, because how to have these conversations is what it's really about.
Fantastic. Well, I'd love to continue the conversation. To be continued.
Yay! Thank you. Where's your next speaking engagement? Where can people find you or see or book you? Let us know how to get in touch with you.
I'm off to beautiful Whistler out in British Columbia. To a resort to speak to a group of business valuators, but I'm doing a large event in September as well for the Hamilton Community Foundation. I do a lot of work for philanthropic organizations. A lot of advisors hire me to speak to their clients. So it's if you go to my website, you'll see my travel schedule, and I'm both on willingwisdom.com and everyfamiliesbusiness.com are my two books.
Great. Wow. Thanks for being here, Dr. Tom Deans, talking about your book, Willing Wisdom, and we are definitely going to have you back. Thanks so much, and thanks for tuning in to Wealth Psychology at Sylvia Global Media. I'm Emily Bouchard, your host, and Dr. Jamie Traeger-Muni sends her regards from Israel. Thanks for tuning in.